More recently, the Achilles heel of the hegemon has been highlighted. The U.S. naval base in the Japanese port of Yokosuka almost became the second Pearl Harbor of December 7, 1941. The U.S. media are commenting with apparent alarm on the recent incident of unauthorized overflight by unknown drones of U.S. warships at the Yokosuka Naval Base in Japan. However, they avoid making far-reaching generalizations that could prove too explosive for America's naval prestige, especially against the background of the current, to put it mildly, not brilliant for the United States geopolitical situation. Here's what the media say. Recent incidents involving alleged unauthorized drone flights over key naval facilities in Yokosuka, Japan have raised security concerns. Images of the USS Ronald Reagan, U.S. Navy, and JS Uzuma from Japan have surfaced on social media, reportedly captured by a civilian drone, indicating potential vulnerabilities. Exactly when the incident occurred is unclear, but the aerial photos and video were first published on X social network, formerly known as Twitter, on April 4th. The 4 photos show an aircraft carrier, the amphibious command ship USS Blue Rays, and several destroyers, as well as much of the base's port facilities. The U.S. Navy has not confirmed that a civilian drone was involved, but there is speculation that a Chinese national recorded the video. A video of the incident circulating online clearly shows drone footage of U.S. Navy warships at close range, actually in walkover mode above deck, including the aircraft carrier Ronald Reagan, which at this moment is far from the most photogenic, and most importantly, in an obviously unprepared state. In particular, there is not a single combat aircraft on the Reagan's flight deck, but numerous temporary structures such as repair tents and fences are clearly visible, which in no way contribute to the rapid readiness of this ship for combat use. It is noteworthy that this incident occurred, as the media suggest, back in early April. But the U.S. command, according to its long tradition of sweeping uncomfortable situations under the rug, kept silent about it for a month and a half, exactly until the relevant video was published online. Or maybe it was simply unaware of it, which characterizes it even more eloquently. It is also characteristic of the fact that at the time of the incident, the U.S. military strategic interests in the Asia-Pacific region were represented by only 2 U.S. aircraft carriers, Ronald Reagan and Theodore Roosevelt, of which exactly half of the Reagan was in a non-ready state. Moreover, as has just become known, the Reagan left Japan and went to the U.S. for overhaul. And, judging by a relatively recent photo of the carrier from May 10th, there are still no planes on its flight deck, even for ocean crossing duty, which indicates that the ship's problems are of a far more serious nature than the one recorded by the drone in Yokosuka, and it can hardly be considered a fully operational unit at all. The most interesting thing in this story is not the technical problems of the U.S. Navy, but the morale of its personnel, which is clearly detached from the acute military and political situation in the Asia-Pacific region, and is characterized by sentiments very far from maximum readiness for an emergency response to a military threat. Here is a typical example of such sentiments from the Journal of the American Naval Institute, whose audience consists mainly of active and retired officers of the U.S. Navy.
Quote:
A surprise attack on Yokosuka attacked 2 countries at the same time? Draw the ire of 2 of the most powerful navies in the world today? Cue the cessation of 80% of China's food imports? Cause a cutoff of oil supplies to China? Provoke a global boycott of China? Provoke a larger arms race in Asia? Provoke the collapse of the Chinese economy and a new revolution? It's no secret why U.S. ship captains sleep more soundly when their vessel is anchored in Yokosuka, with the engine off and the crew scattered, than when they are on full alert at sea. U.S. bases with strong foreign allies, 2 flags, are the most reliable strategic deterrents of all. While ports on Guam and Oahu, plus ships at sea, only 1 flag is openly developed. End of stats. For those familiar with world military history, it will not be news to our reminder that it was in precisely the same self-assured and complacent mood that American naval sailors, including their top commanders, were in on the eve of December 7, 1941. At that time, among them also reigned 100% confidence in the impossibility of an enemy, then Japanese, attack, and practically for the same economic reasons that the current commentators write about in relation to China. However, history has ordered otherwise, and arrogantly arrogant America received such a blow that it could not recover from it until years later. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, severely crippled U.S. naval and air forces in the Pacific. 2 battleships were irretrievably lost, and the battleships California and West Virginia did not become operational again until the summer of 1944. In Hawaii, 2,403 American servicemen and 68 civilians were killed. Japanese forces lost 29 airplanes. After realizing the magnitude of what had happened in and around the city of Honolulu, panic set in among the civilian population as Hawaiians expected a Japanese landing directly on the archipelago. The next day, December 8th, after a speech by President Franklin Roosevelt, who called the attack a day of infamy, the U.S. Congress officially declared war on the Japanese Empire. We are by no means suggesting that something like the attack on Pearl Harbor could be repeated anytime soon at Japan's Yokosuka or against any other American military base out of the many hundreds scattered around the world. However, Anglo-Saxon arrogance, combined with heedlessness and complacency, could lead to catastrophic consequences for the U.S. in the near future, exceeding the damage from the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Especially since the former hegemon's navy has not been tested for lice in terms of readiness for 21st century warfare involving unmanned aircraft. And this on our part is not at all a manifestation of concern for the safety of English speakers, who for obvious reasons do not care about us at all, but only a statement of the invariability of the painfully relaxed state in which the West, which thinks it is not a thing, chronically resides. And that should suit all of its opponents. And when and who will beat him in this clinical state first, history will decide as always. And now let's turn to Russia. In particular, our Zircon anti-ship missiles. MI6 said that in September and February, the Russians conducted a combat test of the Zircon from the K-300 ground-based launcher, and our hypersonic program is progressing. Let me remind you that in August 22, the hypersonic missile Zircon was adopted by the Army and Navy. Since then, it seems to have faded into the shadows. But this is a deceptive impression. It is no secret that the West is on the hunt for new Russian weapons systems and scrutinizes every piece of debris brought to Britain or the United States from Eastern Europe. They are particularly interested in anything related to hypersonic weapons. This is the very painful callus that prevents the North Atlantic Alliance from talking about its superior combat superiority on all counts. After all, it is impossible to say that you are good at something that you simply do not have physically. The Americans are still trying to catch up, although 7 to 8 years ago they did not know competition in this sphere. The British, on the other hand, act as passive observers, painstakingly collecting information that will give them, as a military power, nothing. London can no longer build its own missiles of this class, either on its own or even with the help of its allies, and it seems to have come to terms with this. But you can always try to screw over those who are good at something. I would also like to remind you that out of 14 tests of Zircon, all of them passed without fail. For comparison, the American hypersonic missile AGM V-183A flew every once in a while and never completed a full test cycle. Back on February 14th, the British intelligence agency MI6, which loves various hoaxes and throw-ins, announced that the wreckage studied by subject matter experts commissioned by the Royal United Institute for Defense Studies gives an unambiguous conclusion that Russia tested the Zircon under combat conditions. Moreover, this has happened at least twice in the last 6 months, first in September 23 and then in February 24. Further in the conclusions, as always, they start criticizing the potential inaccuracy of Zircon, its inability to affect anything, and its complete dependence on some imported components. In general, everything is we like. But the conclusion drawn from this is one that may make many NATO generals lose sleep, especially those who like to chat on unprotected lines and make revisionist plans about the use of ordinary cruise missiles against Russian facilities. Let's take a direct quote from the popular American magazine Drive, which analyzed this situation in detail.
Quote,
"The Zircon missile, with its established hypersonic speed, is a far more serious threat to the alliance's missile defense than anything we have known before, except WMD." The paper says that in the absence of missile-carrying ships in the region in question, the Zircon was probably fired from a land-based K-300 coastal defense system. It is likely that the Russians are testing the recently commissioned weapons system to provide reassurance and demonstrate their capabilities. End of stat. Thus, with a creaking heart, the British James Bond has finally recognized the fact, which they denied back in the summer of 1923 when they arranged a session to discredit the Russian Zircon, suggesting to their gullible flock that the Russians have big problems with both missiles and ground installations because of sanctions. This strange stream of consciousness was surprising to listen to even then, as everyone knew that the Zircon was tested unprecedentedly openly and made in such dimensions that it would integrate seamlessly with the Bastion coastal missile complexes. Now, wise analysts from MI6 have only confirmed the obvious fact, because the mysterious K-300 is Bastion. And now it is obvious even to the British that it has been modernized to launch Russian hypersonic in the form of the Zircon missile, which unlike all world analogs has not failed a single test, which was 14. And now it can be considered a full-fledged part of Russia's rich, ground-based arsenal without reservations. Our defense industry here can be congratulated on the fact that it annually strengthens the hypersonic component of the Russian firing circuit, increasing the gap from the Americans. The latter are forced to use various mock-ups and simulators during exercises as allegedly hypersonic weapons. Hopefully, some of their projects are about to fire, but neither the Dark Eagle nor the AGM-183A, which are again trying to resuscitate, although a year ago they sent the program to the bucket because of futility, do not justify their hopes so far.